All right. Well, welcome to another session of BPH Breakdown. Thank you all for being defenders of the detruser. As you guys have seen on these slides, things are coming up. In February is the Society of Benign Prostatic Disease meeting in February, and the European Association of Urology, April 6th through 8th in Paris, France. And we hope you all can make that. All right. As always, we want to celebrate the next generation of urologists who are up and coming, the up and coming defenders of the detruser. So great to see the tribe growing in breadth and depth here with Christine Theodom, all the way from Senegal. Thank you for joining us, and we're excited to see what you can bring to all those men with BPH and BPO in Senegal. So today, let's just quickly go over who we are and who we are not. We are chief energizing officers in the spaces that we inhabit, that we can transform for better BPH, BPO care, because our mission continues to be to empower our patients with the educational experience to make the decision even faster about their prostate care by highlighting the possible consequences of choices if the choice is made not to take definitive action. And as always, we're helping our men face, embrace, and move through their fear, the acronym for Face Everything and Rise. We'll look at some of the LinkedIn polls that we've had out about IPSS, as well as talking about bladder outlet obstruction, BPO, and asymptomatic men, as well as IPSS as a predictor of outlet obstruction. And so let's start. As always, thankful for Amanda Chung, the defender, who's really highlighted the death and destruction at the level of electron microscopy, looking at normal controls and the death and dysfunction and destruction as we see bladder outlet obstruction, detruser underactivity, and we can see that in the bladder with trabeculation, cellules, and diverticuli. As urologists, we need to get back to trusting the truth of trabeculations, that is a detruser that is under duress and needs our help. The 5 stages of bladder health are really critical, as we've talked about. Feel free to check it out. I introduced the concepts, and then the Italian brigade took it to the next level. They took the torch and got it published in the Journal of Prostatic Cancer and Prostatic Diseases last October. So feel free to get that. There's a free copy if you want to subscribe at manverseprostate.com. And remember our triple Ps, that MVP trifecta. We are out to prioritize the preservation of bladder health, put an end to the polypharmacy epidemic, and prevent late-stage BPH, BPO. And as we talk about the 5 stages of bladder health, those are the last 3 stages: urge urinary incontinence, acute urinary retention, and detruser underactivity. The Italian brigade is leading a hard charge in Europe right now under the leadership of Luca Cindolo. And feel free to go to the website and get a free copy of that, or the pandemic ebook that kind of launched this all during the pandemic. Because a tsunami is coming, and we've talked about that. It's already crashing into the shores of the UK as well as in Sweden. And it's knocking on our doors every day when we're on call in the emergency room late at night, when that guy comes in with 2 liters in his bladder needing a catheter. We need to find ways to change our BPH, BPO care pathways so that we can prevent these evidence of late-stage BPH. And we've talked about this. Has been posted on LinkedIn. This is just a rough draft, a living document of a vision of a pathway that reflects the trifecta of what we believe in, that is centered around the preservation of bladder health. And today, as circled here, let's talk a little bit more about the IPSS, because we do feel it has a role, but we need to characterize that role very carefully. We saw this last week about, this is a sample IPSS, where we can see the voiding subscore and the storage subscores are divided up to allow us to get a sense of not just the prostate and how tight it is, but more importantly, as we look at the storage subscore, a reflection of what's going on into the bladder. Thank you for those who are signed in today. Feel free to leave a comment of where you're coming in from, and good morning to you all, or if you're from far away, good afternoon or good evening. One of the big challenges with the IPSS is anamnesis. This is a term taught to us by defender Sony Schlen and from Sweden, where it's really the process of recollecting or remembering. And as a result, it's really hard for our men to remember how they've been doing over the last 30 days. And it introduces a lot of recall bias into the IPSS. And before we dive in, always we like to go on this day in history. I think it's really important to know where we're coming from. It helps us to know where we're going. So on this day in history, in 1535, Lima, Peru was founded by Francisco Pizarro. In 1886, modern hockey, and I apologize, I just realized that some of the screens weren't showing, but modern hockey in 1886 was born in England. In 1896, the first X-ray machine was born. And in 1990, the Paris Peace Conference started out, where we set the peace terms after World War I with the Treaty of Versailles. In tribute to the Norwegian defenders that have recently reached out, in 1997, Norwegian Bore Osland crossed the Antarctica for the very first time, alone and unaided, 3,000 miles. And in 2002, the Sierra Leone Civil War ended. A lot to learn from the past that we can apply to the future. And just like that, also with IPSS, a lot there that we can recognize. And as we learned last week, our concern is that the bladder, as men, we are not reliable witnesses for what is going on inside our bodies and what's going on with our bladders. We have, as men, been bearing false witness to our bladders, as we define as knowingly stating as fact that which is untrue, to begin or perpetuate a rumor by lying about a person, thing, or an event. So many men with BPH, BPO have been perpetuating the fact that they think their bladder's okay, but actually it isn't. And they keep telling us that they are fine. And as you all remember, that four-letter word is representative of IFS, the I'm fine syndrome that so many men suffer from as they wear that armor of masculinity, when in truth, they're not fine. It's not okay to be getting up 3 times a night. It's not okay to have urgent incontinence. It's not okay to be showing up in the emergency room in retention. In LinkedIn, we posted this poll. We asked, for an asymptomatic man over 44 years of age with an IPS of 2, what % are non-obstructed on a pressure flow study? And what we found was, there's a nice publication, 2001, out of Charing Cross Hospital in the UK in London, 24 asymptomatic volunteers with a median IPSS of 2 and a quality life of 1, as we can see here. And we asked, what % do you think are non-obstructed? And what was impressive was 58% were non-obstructed, meaning the remainder were either obstructed or possibly evolving into obstruction, as we can see over here. And so even in the best case scenario where men are reporting that they're asymptomatic with an IPSS of 2, a significant proportion of them are having problems, and they need us to look deeper into the diagnostic pathway to give them more data so that they can make the best decisions about their bladder health so that they don't enter into late stage BPH. And so can men be trusted to know if there's a problem? I don't think so. And so as you can see here in the poll on LinkedIn, 11% felt that 75 to 100% of these men were non-obstructed, when in truth, the answer was here in the middle, where 58% were non-obstructed. Men do not report reliably about their symptoms. And the second study we want to talk about today is a great study that came out in 2023. I just want to highlight the authors here: Tobias Kohler out of Rochester, Minnesota at the Mayo Clinic, Sankar Kaushik out of Chesapeake Urology, together with David Mahoney from SRS Medical. And they came together, and I think it's going to take that village approach for us to really conquer and overcome the hurdles for BPH, BPO, where we work with industry, we work with academics, we work with the community to start answering these questions about a better pathway for our men. And what they found was that they looked at about 1,077 men who had come in, and they had had a pressure flow studies. On average, they had an IPSS of 10, average age of 67, voided volumes of 305 cc's with a maximum average flow of 12 cc's per second. And when they looked at men who were obstructed versus unobstructed versus men who were evolving into obstruction, pretty well distributed here. About a third were unobstructed, 37% were evolving with high pressure, high flow into obstruction, which was 27%. And 7.7% had entered into the low pressure, low flow quadrant, suspicious for hypotonicity or detrusor underactivity. And what we learned is that if you look across these four quadrants, all the way from unobstructed to obstructed to detrusor underactivity, the distribution of IPSS is very similar. We can see here 51, 50, 54, 54% of these men had moderate IPSS scores. 12, 16, 22, 19% had severe IPSS scores. And at the bottom, 37, 34, 25, 27 had mild IPSS score. And that distribution clearly is very similar across the spectrum from unobstructed all the way over here to detrusor underactivity. And it cannot discriminate who was who. In fact, if we look at it more carefully, if we look at sensitivity, and I say kind of with the statistics, is because this is not a binary thing. There's actually a gradation, a progression. But in general, if we looked at all the men who were obstructed, the percent of men who were obstructed with an IPSS over 7, that would be 76% of men had moderate to severe IPSS symptoms who were obstructed. But that means that there's 20%, 25% who were obstructed but came in with mild IPSS scores. We would be missing 1 in 4 of these men, missing a quarter of the men who need our help. Then we look at specificity, the ability to find out those without the disease, the percent of patients who are not obstructed with an IPSS less than 8. You can see here, only 37% had mild IPSS scores. The concern for that is around 60% are being mismanaged based on the wrong diagnosis of obstruction when they are really not obstructed. And so in conclusion, in man versus prostate, we would agree the Lutz diagnosis cannot use IPSS alone. It is insufficient to create diagnostic certainty. And that's why with the BPH BPO care pathway, it is really important that we use not just IPSS. And that's why we've proposed IPSS over 7 plus either a Qmax less than 15 cc's per second and or a PVR more than 100 cc's. And that's what we're currently researching to find that out. And we'll let you know more about that as we come along with that. So in conclusion, this data suggests that, yeah, IPSS is not a reliable way to predict outlet obstruction or unobstruction. And as a result, it's really important for us to know that it's not just in that one study. Here's another study in 2022 from the Netherlands. They did a quick database research looking at multiple studies here, looking at IPS, and they also concluded that since the sensitivity was moderate to poor and the specificity was only moderate to good for IPSS as a predictor of outlet obstruction. So we're beginning to see that amongst multiple studies around the world. And this Canadian Journal article just confirms what we always suspected, which was the IPSS is not reliable and that men are not reliable witnesses for their bladders. And once again, men are knowingly stating as fact that which is untrue. They are perpetuating a rumor that their bladder is okay. And so with that, we had a survey that went out. Do you believe the IPSS is an accurate predictor of the bladder outlet obstruction in patients with BPH and BPO? 32% felt it was accurate. That is a high number based on this data. only 39% saw it and would disagree and felt that the IPSS is limited. I would have expected this number to be much higher, but it just means that we need to get better education out to other providers, other practices to understand that, yeah, IPSS is part of the puzzle. It is the start of the process. And we're going to talk about that more in the future. And because men are not reliable witnesses, in some ways, the IPSS could be playfully thought of as the imaginative prostate subjective symptom score. It's not objective data. It is their reality, but it is not accurate. And once again, multiple studies showing the poor predictive value of IPSS to predict bladder outlet obstruction. I would encourage you all to look at your own data. This is a subset of my data from 2018, 2019. 65% had pressure flow studies. Fascinating. There was only a 3.4 point spread. Sorry, that was a tongue twister. If you can see here, the average IPSS for the unobstructed was 16.1 versus the average for the guys who were obstructed was 19.5. So that's only a difference of 3.4 points. And so I just want to let you know that, but look at your data, trust your own data, and make sure you have a sense of, for your men, for your population, how accurate is it? Big shout out to Melissa Smith for joining us. Really appreciate that. For you being here today. Thank you. I hope everyone is doing well in Houston, Texas, and the stream team, the dream team. Yeah, and thank you for being a defender of the detruser. We really appreciate what you guys all do out there. And so next up is, but trust your own data. And here's another good example. Know your patients as well. This is a 74-year-old gentleman, a Vietnam War vet, a Top Gun pilot, tough as nails. He filled it as IPSS with a score of 3. He was just, for his nocturia, but 3 here, so a total of 6. Mild on the IPSS score. But the index of suspicion, knowing who he is, went ahead and had a pressure flow study, and here he is obstructed. So please, IPSS is just part of the equation. Know your patients and know when you need to dig a little deeper to understand if there's a bladder that's at risk for death and dysfunction. So here's again, just a LinkedIn post. Please work with your pressure flow technology and get a sense of how accurate is your IPSS for your population in predicting bladder outlet obstruction. A very important note is that the bladder can be a reliable witness. We can be a reliable witness for BOO if we allow the bladder to talk. Specifically, let's get those bladder health baselines. Specifically, cystoscopy is critical. It's that qualitative data. Urologists need to remember that we have seen thousands of bladders, and we need to trust the truth of trabeculations. Trabeculations are a call sign that that bladder is in distress, under duress, and is at risk for death and dysfunction, as well as get quantitative data. If you have access to pressure flow data, pressure flow studies, that is really critically important as well. And remember that accurate data drives appropriate decision-making. And that's a really key slogan for this year. I think we need to understand that men want their data. The modern man wants their data, and we can put that data on the table so that we can share it together to make the best decision even possible. Best decision possible for that prostate care and for the preservation of bladder health. If there's been any value in our crusade over the last 2 years, Defender Austin Slade, who's been pioneering Bladder Health 2.0 and understanding the economic sustainability aspects of BPH, BPO care, they calculated we need about $250,000 to launch this nationally, a campaign to educate providers and patients. And so feel free to jump on, and if you feel like it moves you or you have value, we'd always appreciate the support at GoFundMe. And as well as go to manversusprostate.com, you can get a free copy of the journal article on prostate cancer and prostatic diseases, as well as the pandemic layman person's ebook that kind of launched this campaign. And we look forward to working with you As always, the wellness quote to start with: if you want to live a happy life, tie it to a goal, not to people or things. And that's what Albert Einstein shared with us. So next week is going to be, where do we go from here? And I would submit that while IPSS may not be accurate information, it is an authentic invitation. And we're going to talk more about that next week on how do we do that? How do we create an invitation using the IPSS to invite ourselves and our patients into the shared decision-making process? All right, defenders of the detruser, let's go. Save more bladders. All right, have a great one, and we'll see you next week. Be well. Bye.